I'm very excited to welcome Art Yerkes to our show. So, Art is working with Chia Network Incorporated. He is currently focusing a lot of his time on the Chialisp compiler and also on Chia Gaming. Art, I was wondering if you could just give us a quick introduction. I think you first crossed paths with Bram at working together at BitTorrent. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you guys are working together at BitTorrent, and then some period of time passes, and Bram approached you and said, "Hey, you got to come work for me at Chia." Is that kind of the crux of it, or give us a bit
Yeah,
more?
it's a little different from that. I really didn't know Bram when I joined BitTorrent. Like I kind of heard of BitTorrent, but I wasn't really a big BitTorrent user at the time. But I interviewed there because a friend of mine was working there, and he recommended it as a good place to work. So I worked on the client team writing C++ with Arvid and Adam Kelly and others, Robert McDonald at the time. And so we just
And was this about
mhm.
2009 when you were working there, or what was the year?
Yeah, it was just February of 2009 when I joined. I had left. I had tried gaming, but the pace was very brutal. Admittedly, my constitution just can't keep up with it, admittedly. So I took a little bit of time off and then I went to BitTorrent.
And
Um,
were you deep in the
mhm.
world of C++ plus plus kind of at that time? Like, had you been coming from a big background in C++? Plus plus?
I had earlier the previous project that I had worked on. So I had gone to Perpetual Entertainment, and the game Gods and Heroes was all in C++. We used to pass around books on template metaprogramming. Like it was very heavily cerebral about C++. And previous to that, Adam and I had worked on a live streaming conferencing tool in the early 2000s, and that was all C++ and ATL. So I was kind of embedded in that. I worked a little bit on Swig, so I wrote the Swig to OCaml bindings that will allow you to do sort of semi-dynamic binding to OCaml code. Uh, you know, sort of driving C++ code from OCaml to a degree, allowing you to make sort of surrogate subclass objects from OCaml for C++, and that got me into my boss at Secret Level actually was working on doing some things with C# and Swig. And since I had worked on Swig, that was one of the things that recommended me at Secret Level. So when I
At,
got
at,
there,
at,
though,
at
I
roughly
wrote
that
Mhm.
at roughly that time in the world, so like kind of 2008 to 2009,
This was
were you
2006
using
at that point. Hmm.
2006? Okay. Well, I'm kind of trying to laser in on a specific time because I was curious about your experiences. In 2008, 2009, what was your recollection of how widespread the usage of Boost was? Was that on the fringe, or did everybody was pretty much using it
It
by
was
that point?
just breaking out. And admittedly, I'm like not a super big community person. My main let's say tie at that time to native code was via React. So I was writing a lot of C then. But yeah, I remember going into my interviews at BitTorrent, and like Arvid is a really big proponent of Boost, and I had been sort of looking around and using. At the time, I was tinkering with Boost preprocessor actually to try some stuff out, but I Perpetual really wasn't they didn't use Boost at all at Perpetual. It was all sort of ground up, homegrown template space. But I think just at the time I was hearing a lot about Boost and experimenting with it myself. And we started going from just bare Win32 threading. Like we first started adopting C++11 style threading metaphors, such as condition variable and such, in through Boost in the BitTorrent client.
So, what's your crypto origin? Did you catch wind of Bitcoin during that kind of early days of when the white paper dropped, or did you not really start to look into the world of crypto until later?
I actually didn't know much about crypto until one of the startups that I participated in, and I started just tinkering with Ethereum a little bit. But admittedly, I'm kind of I'm an oddball in that I'm sort of I take a very pragmatic thought process about crypto, in the sense that I think there's a place for cryptocurrency as a technology in the world, but I wasn't really I wasn't neither a strong proponent nor opponent to it before coming to Chia.
My background in crypto was sort of the introduction I had was through Ethereum. So I did a lot of programming with Ethereum in the two startup companies that I was doing, roughly 2015 to 2017. So that was where a lot of my experience was from. And when I came to Chia, I actually found that there was quite a bit that I tried to reach for it, and in the early days, I didn't have a lot of success. So I was used to working with Truffle and Ganache and the programming environment that was available in Ethereum at around that time. And so when I wanted to start doing some stuff in Chia, I was like, well, where's the simulator? Where are the things that I need to be effective in programming against the blockchain? And I felt like it wasn't there. So that was one of the things that I first started doing. And I had a chance to work with Strya and some of the other folks at Chia to get some of that tooling in place. So I've got a little bit of the same background, I think, that you do, is that I was first exposed to Ethereum and came to the CoinSet model a bit later.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, it's one of my missions, and admittedly, I haven't been great at this yet. But to try and get much better tooling in place for, especially for debugging and for running programs, and I've made a few efforts in that range, but I need to do probably an order of magnitude better to actually succeed. Like the fact is that I need to come up with an experience that's far more compelling to get traction on it.
So I've been checking out the Chia gaming repository, and it seems like there's been some pretty big commits that have happened lately. How close are we? And it seems like it's getting really, really close. Do you feel pretty confident that there's a playable version of poker coming soon?
I mean, you can play Cal Poker with the simulator that's in there, or with the simulator based test server, you might say. What it includes is the Python the Python simulator that's in the Chia blockchain tree is imported via PYO3, and so we sort of isolate it in its own async space and run it whenever we need to push a transaction or farm a block or whatever. But on top of that is some middleware that contains the game, and a little HTTP server that makes it all go, along with a very simple web-based interface that just shows off two players playing the game. And admittedly, Master is a little bit out of date. Chia works in a way that's a little bit counterintuitive, in the sense
What's
that
the branch we should be looking at? What's the
let me grab my work branch here. probably the branch that should be looked at. Yeah, Adam is still working back on, here, I'll paste this. This is probably the most stable, interesting point, although admittedly, I've been getting a little bit of burnout recently, so I took about a week off, but I've been admittedly marching a little bit slowly for a month or so, but I'm hoping to kind of get back on track. Our goal is to squeeze all of the to-dos out of potato handler and peer container by the end of the year. So that's kind of what I'm
and as far as
to.
when we're looking at this, potato is that idea that you're tossing the state back and forth between the odd numbers and the even numbers in the channel, right? Is that what the potato is?
Yeah, Bram named that, so don't blame me. But
I was gonna blame you. That's why my
okay.
first thought, it was like, well, Art must have named this.
No, I did not come up with that. But so anyway, it's the idea is that the person with the potato can make the next move. They're allowed to change the state and sign it, and then send a message that conveys that state change. And so that's the meaning of the potato, is that I have control of the channel and I can change the state.
That's how I was describing it to Lucas when we were discussing how this worked. I said, yeah, there's actually a thing called the potato, and you can think about it just like a hot potato. When you've got it,
Right.
then you got to throw it to the other guy, and then it goes back and forth.
Yeah. So at one level up at potato handler, there's an idea of a non-potato message. So you can, like, one of them is to request the potato. And the reason that might be needed is, for example, the next game that Bram is going to do is Crunk. Bram has been writing all of the Chialisp, and he was dissatisfied with the single form Chia, Chialisp, which we'll get into later, but or if you'd like. But anyway, I wrote tentatively.
A card game? I'm not familiar with that one.
So his idea is that it's like a 2-participant Wordle race, basically. And the reason I mention it is that it has 2 parallel games going on in the channel, and the players can make moves at their own pace. So you may have the potato in that, like, I made a move, and then obviously that conveys the potato, but it would be legal for me to then make another move on my game. So I must get the potato back from you, and then make that next move on my game, since they run in parallel and asynchronously.
How long has Adam Kelly been working on gaming? Did this happen relatively recently?
Yeah, just recently Adam came in.
Is that because he rolled off something else, or is it because he's got the skills to do the specific thing that was needed on gaming now?
I mean, Adam has a lot of skills. He's been embedded in the main repo, and I have not. But it's more like Bram wanted to get it to a certain point, and then start adding labor once the sort of center pillar of the happy path was in. So that's why Adam kind of got into it. Also, Adam was winding down work on another project in the main tree. So also we know each other. Like, Adam and I went to college together, so we've been working on the same projects on and off for over 20 years.
It's always fun when you get to keep working with people you've worked with in the past. You find somebody you like, and then you get to, either one of them goes to a different place or somebody else does, and you get to follow them. I think it's been one of the funnest parts of my career, is to sort of teleport into some other company and then get to do something fun with your friends.
Yeah.
Art, the Crunk game that's coming, is that an allusion to the Emperor's New Groove?
I don't know, actually. I have not watched the Emperor's New Groove. I don't know what Bram was thinking of when he came up with the name.
well, there's not a lot of Disney films I'd recommend, but it's a pretty good one. I
All right.
asked just because we were talking about game theory earlier, and I don't know. I think it's interesting that he's already moving into the idea of confirmation of truth, not just determined by an alternate party or the negation of an alternate party. Anyway, if you find out, let us know.
All right.
So in the development of Chia Gaming and the Chialisp compiler, you guys have been working a lot on the performance aspects of the code. Is that right? I mean, it seemed like from the and I'm hearkening back to this one conversation that happened and then never got posted again. It was live. It was a conversation between you and Bram, and it's unfortunate that that got lost somehow. I think Jay Eckert was facilitating the conversation. And I remember listening to it kind of very fascinated and hearing all the work that you had been doing with respect to advancing the state of the art of Chialisp development for stuff that Bram wanted to do. But also in that discussion, there was a lot of talk about how you were optimizing things and making CLVM and Chialisp operate in a really high performant way. Can you talk a little bit about why that was needed in the context of this gaming thing, or is it that you're laying the groundwork for something else?
So I didn't even, I had been participating on and off with Bram at the time. He wrote much of this Chialisp quite a bit earlier, like early last year, and then kind of sat on it for a while he was considering, how the channel layer would function. But sort of separately, everybody needs cost to be lower in compiled Chialisp programs. They need to execute fewer instructions. They need fewer bytes because every byte has 12,000 cost. So, obviously you want fewer applies, you want fewer bytes. And in a normal compiler, you almost always want to inline things because RAM is cheap and instructions are expensive. But in Chia, the balance is much different. Bytes are often almost as expensive as re-executing a loop, for example, if it's like, aggregating some information over a short list. So, the trade-offs are much tighter, and optimizing Chialisp output is actually a lot harder than it is in a conventional programming language for that reason. And yeah, everyone cares about cost, and you hear about it a lot. So I admit that when I came into Chia, I was not surprised. I was not prepared, I should say, to know about that. That was a thing that I kind of blindsided myself. I was a bit ambitious when I came in, and I'm still a bit ambitious, but I know more.
How does that feedback channel actually work? Is this like the conversations that you're having with CNI customers? Is that like where people are complaining about byte sizes, or is it coming from the community?
No, it's more just individual Chia developers. Chia is kind of stratified and has castles in it, you might say. And the customer castle is pretty far.
But politically, this is like the way that information flows within the company itself.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a whole lot of things. So I'm speaking heavily in metaphor, let's say. But it's the case that when I hear about it, it's always a person who's asking me, I think I should be able to do this for 30, and I'm getting 32. Let's say 30 million cost, and the cost is 32 million, and that's your fault, so you should fix it. And they're not wrong about that.
That is fascinating that these conversations are happening. I really appreciate you giving us a little insight into the way that the team is functioning, because I never anticipated that these types of conversations are actually occurring, but it's cool to hear that they are.
No, people are like the among the first things that Brun does is like you can ask it like what's the cost to execute this to execute this program, and obviously now that fees have started to become a thing, people are absolutely thinking about how much in a CryptoKitties every block is full scenario, how much are people actually paying to get this transaction through. So it's constantly on everyone's mind.
And is that also one of the reasons why there's been such a tremendous focus at CNI around re-implementing into Rust? Is that also on the same line of needing to just like have a very strong foundation of performance because of anticipated stuff that's come down the pipe?
I mean, it's not even anticipated. Every time something moves into Rust in the CLVM side or the transaction side, it's because somebody has a Raspberry Pi and they're not happy about how long block validation is taking. Like brass tacks, that's what it's about.
That's when you start getting those little messages in the debug log that says took too long to validate block or whatever, or you get that warning.
Yeah, there are quite a few people inside
block
Chia. Oh, sorry.
And block validation is mostly just it's running Chialisp, right? So this is why this is kind of hand in hand.
Right. Yeah, a lot of the cost of block validation is taking the full block program and then running it entirely. CLVM ultimately has the program that does the block checking ultimately is a big CLVM program and has to execute error free, and then it produces the big long set of additions and removals for the block. And so in order to validate, you have to run that for sure. And CLVM, it could execute an order of magnitude faster if it was structured differently, but the way it's built is very theory friendly. Like it's really mathy and nice in that way, but unfortunately it makes it kind of a pain to execute fast.
It would execute fast. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that. Like, what is the trade-off between being theoretically friendly, math friendly, and being able to execute fast? You took me aback for a second because I was trying to think about what would that mean, or like what were the trade-offs that were actually causing that? I'm curious.
Well, if you look at among the best VMs that anybody ever made was Dalvik. If you look into how Dalvik bytecode works, it's and actually Lua, come to think of it, is structurally pretty similar. But basically, entering a function, the function just declares I need this much local register space, and it basically every instruction just retrieves a value or sets a value in the register space, and optionally there are stores and loads from there are sort of heap-like stores and loads in the VM as well. But it's basically all about taking this local region that you've locked off and that hopefully will be faulted into the cache very quickly, and then just mutating it a lot. That's when VMs run fast, because you can pre-store those addresses, you can JIT those instructions into a small number of local instructions on your local hardware, and it all looks like the real machine. Like WASM does this. WASM does something similar, not exactly that as well. CLVM, on the other hand, does not have a linear flow. To describe it sort of from a math-like perspective, you take the leftmost uncollapsed node in a tree of nodes, and you evaluate that. And if it throws, then you abort, and otherwise you replace its value. Like, sort of completely theoretically, you could think of it this way, even though that isn't the right way to implement it. But sort of the fastest implementation you could come up with has, sort of two parallel stacks, an operation stack and a value work stack. So you're using the heap a lot, like addition. You don't think of the addition operator using the heap, but in CLVM, it absolutely must, because you never overwrite a value. The result of addition can be, and almost always is in practice, a different size from the two input values. So it's hopeless to hope that you could overwrite one of them anyway. Every value can be retained. You're constantly traversing the value tree in the environment, since you don't have linear addresses. All you have are in bit by bit environment paths. So it's kind of it's a nightmare scenario for trying to go fast in emulation, you might say.
So when you're working on stuff like this, do you go out to the broader community to find Chialisp to put through your testing cycle to look at how the compiler is doing it? Or is it that you have access to a body of work internally at CNI and that's as sophisticated as it gets? I'm kind of curious about this. Like, do you look at stuff like Circuit DAO or Tibet Swap, or is the CNI internal repositories much more sophisticated than any of that?
I would say that's probably the wrong way of asking the question. So Circuit DAO is Sebastian, I think. And I worked with him a lot, actually, when he was at Chia and after, sort of talking through some of the language features that I added. The process was more chaotic than you might imagine it would be, for a lot of reasons. Some of that's my fault and some of that's Chia's fault. But mostly what I look at is sort of how when I'm adding features to the language, if someone wants them, and assuming they kind of have a customer, basically what the impact will be on the generated code, and taking hypotheticals like the singleton, for example, or some of the NFT programs, and saying, okay, hypothetically, let's say I write this in a more natural style with let bindings or assign bindings, with with map and lambda instead of an unrolled loop through a couple of functions. Like, how does that impact its cost? And admittedly, from a trade-off between time and features and who the customer is, it has not always been the case that I've come one-to-one parity, although there are a different set of tricks to optimizing modernized Chialisp that get decent performance increases. It's ongoing work to say every program every time gets optimized as or better than classic Chialisp. And there are reasons.
Well, when you have those classic compilation modes and you try to say, well, if something didn't put a sigil at the top of the Chialisp and its output should be some particular thing, have you had to go back and produce a specification that says this is what classic Chialisp means, and if someone were to want to, I don't know, re-implement the compiler, they'd need to do it this way? Or is that not really a concern that
it's always been specification by implementation, like from the beginning? There's never really been a formal specification of how Chialisp compilation functions. And I think that It could be made, and there are reasons you'd want to. Ultimately, among my next jobs is to fully synthesize, now that I've got the compilation passes sort of where I want them in modern Chialisp, to synthesize the best aspects of classics optimization, and do that in a way that doesn't break debugging. That's kind of that's the next horizon of optimizing Chialisp, both from a compilation perspective and a language perspective. But the short answer is we've been working at capacity, just trying to make things as good as they can be from an operational perspective, without thinking about specifying the language and its output in a more formal way.
I know that something that's being looked at by the community recently is the work that Cameron did on options trading and making that work in Chialisp. Did you have access to a repository that had his implementation and a chance to peek at what he's doing? Because I haven't seen anything published on that, and I was curious if you're abreast or if you're familiar with what he was working on there.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it, admittedly. I've been buried in a bunch of other things. I may not be the most informed on the community.
I'm just curious. I'm more curious on the front of how much you're trying to say, I want to look at every possible piece of Chialisp code that's been written to make sure that it's part of my suite of, I'm trying to make sure that this does the absolute best of all time. And I'm just imagining you kind of running a classic Chialisp compiler, looking at a bunch of the stats from what it produces, and then saying, what if I ran it through my compiler? Does it do better from performance, size, this kind of stuff? That's why I was asking those questions, honestly.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested. It's more a question. There's a lot of balancing to do, I guess. I've got stuff that is immediately wanted by Bram. I've got, the other things I'm balancing are, I feel like we're way behind, as you mentioned initially, on debugging and the runtime infrastructure. We were way behind on simply knowing how to provide decent ergonomics to the compiler, like how to localize error messages and stuff. And I've got infrastructure for that. So that was a thing that I made. It's also the case that I tend to try to tread lightly around people who are sort of in the community working on stuff. So I haven't really gone hard on engaging in that way. It's also the case that the last time I even worked on the compiler was in March. So I've spent the last 9 months, or I guess 7 months, just buried in the thing that I'm working on. My focus tends to be very unitary when I'm focused on a thing. But
so does that mean you're mostly writing Rust code these days? Is that kind of the world looks like for you?
I mean, that's been my whole time at Chia, has been writing Rust code. But yeah, basically just buried in trying to get gaming out the door at the moment. But yeah, I suppose it's right to say I've been a little too insular, and I need to, now that I've kind of produced a few of the things that seemed more critical, should absolutely surface and get more, get a better wind for what's going on in the Chialisp writing community.
So with respect to gaming, it sounds like we're, or at least CNI is starting to turn a page where there's more people in the repository, different people are coming in here and doing some development. Is there any work on a UI being done, or is that still to be done as well?
Yeah, we've got the an internal person who's a front end person and an external person who does user experience design, kind of working on it part-time. So those are ongoing efforts that are going, sort of marching along. Not really ready for it at the moment, since we don't have haven't made the code for the tracker, although that's not a huge deal. Need to do just some other things, like lay out the groundwork sketch of how, a deployed, Webpack and then run in Node kind of hosting scenario works for it. Some of that other stuff. That's what the front end person is currently doing.
I know that one of the things Bram had mentioned about the work on gaming was a way to get this state channel and payment channel infrastructure going in a substantive way. Is the work that's been done so far really enabling that? Do you feel like now that you've gotten as far as you have into Chia gaming, that there's a solid L2 infrastructure in place that could be used to do arbitrary types of stuff, or is it pretty still tied to what Bram wanted to do with gaming?
I would say, like, fixing up a couple of things, it's absolutely can be good for that. I would say it's not a stable thing yet. I would say poke back in January when lots more things are landed and we've kind of squeezed out a lot more testing, and basically, as I say, get rid of all the to-dos in the main parts of it. It's still under active development, and Bram and my styles absolutely clash a little bit. So I tend to take a more conservative, I tend to be a little bit more conservative when writing new code. Bram tends to write a lot of code and then write tests afterward. I tend to try and test what's reachable and work through a code base without writing things ahead. At least when I'm less of an expert on what the what the overall thing is, and I'm definitely learning a lot about payment channels and crypto for sure.
When you say you're learning a lot about payment channels, is there other chains that are doing stuff that seems interesting, or that you're learning from, or how do you get educated on the state of the art?
I ask Bram a question, and then I try and craft questions to Bram in as precise terms as I can make them. Basically, that's how I'm learning about it.
And when he's providing those answers, I can totally envision these kinds of conversations happening where you have to be very precise about the type of stuff that you're asking for. Do you know if he's out there looking at other stuff, or is this mostly just he's starting from first principles and saying, well, this is the way that it should be done theoretically, so we're just going to start from the math and sort of work our way up?
Yeah, I think Bram kind of started from a notion of how other systems were not as good as they could have been. For example, the weakness of he often mentions the weakness of at least one of Bitcoin's level twos, that when unrolled, it can be the state can be bumped multiple times. They didn't limit the unroll to a single unroll and then a single challenge. So, for example, that's one of the intricacies that makes Chia gaming kind of different. Admittedly, that's not something I had put a lot of thought or study into before starting this. I think mainly I'm working on it because Bram was thinking of it as a very Chialisp heavy project and wanted specific things from the Chialisp language. And so as an extension of that, I was the person who started writing the mechanics of the thing that Bram had in his mind.
Right. That's that whole thing of Bram wrote a bunch of code and then said, Art, make this compile. That was that exchange, right?
Yes. Yeah, and Chia's the architecture of Chia's way of operating accommodates that only hesitantly. So it's another thing where the things on my plate at Chia are maybe not what you might imagine they would be as far as day-to-day challenges, if you see what I mean.
Can you say any more about that? I'm curious.
Probably not, but
it's unfortunate that we have to dance around some stuff internally like that, because I'm envisioning what this answer might actually be, but I'll be respectful and not pry too much more there.
All right.
Lucas, you had a few questions. I'm curious if we've gotten too deep into these technical weeds. If we could take maybe a step back and you could jump in there and ask a question or two.
Well, I'm enjoying the technical dive, even though I don't necessarily catch everything. But earlier you said that some of the problems that you have to do with non-linear or non-linear aspects in the language. What do you mean when you say that it's not like I'm
well, in CLVM?
Okay, and
often Chialisp and CLVM are kind of spoken about in the same breath, but they're like the Chialisp language doesn't necessarily need to have precisely the same semantics as CLVM, although it costs much less when it does. So you could sort of think about the language and the target VM independently, and sometimes it's useful not to separate them that much, but they really deserve more separation.
Got you. Okay, that makes more sense to me. And I also, as you're talking, earlier you said you take a pragmatic approach to crypto, and I was wondering how you think about. I think it's a great thing to be very practical about something that you're working on, but the things that you're working on can have a massive impact in the world. How do you think about like your tenure? Is there something that drives you ideologically, like with regards to, say, being a part of BitTorrent and Chia? Are you a decentralization maxi, or did that just sort of happen and you're happy with the people that you work with? Like, is that something that drives you when you're working on these things?
I'm not. My views on decentralization are probably heterodox to just about everybody, but I think that some of it gets into politics, and that's probably not what this is about. But I guess you could say that the main reason I was at BitTorrent and I'm here is because I knew at least one person who was working there, and after having been at BitTorrent, I had a lot of respect for Bram. I initially, how to answer the question exactly? I'm cautiously optimistic about attempts at decentralization, and I think that the way society functions, it's a complex enough system that there are lots of different islands of stability that can be had. And I think sort of cautious moves toward decentralization both provide bridges to more desirable rather than less desirable ones at times. And so even though I'm not a decentralization maxi in that way, I think having those options and having those competitive alternatives is often advantageous to society. Let me put it that way.
Well, thank you for tackling that. And I would say, I think there's a whole gamut of political takes when it comes to crypto, but I at the earliest outset, it was a chance to use protocols, to use networking communication to defeat third parties who didn't have our best interests in mind. And some of that has gotten lost over 15 years of different focuses, but it seems to me that some of the ideas, the notions behind BitTorrent and have been carried over to Chia have remained focused on that use. So part of what keeps me I should say I don't want to throw myself in a box, especially not today of all days. But thank you for taking a tackle at that sort of side.
If I could say one thing about how I see Chia kind of in the stratum of providing, the many things that crypto can do. Bram probably has the best compromise out there. Putting a VM as capable as CLVM is, but strict and with no mutability, but sort of putting an instruction set on it that's very capable at arbitrary computation I think it's a really good synthesis of the best kinds of things people were doing with crypto, sort of before it. Like it scratches the itch of the Ethereum world computer concept in that you can do real computation on Chia. And in fact, you can do things that are even better in a lot of ways. You can, like, nothing prevents you from simulating a part of a simple computation, coming up with an intermediate result and continuing to simulate it over many blocks, for example. So there's no real limit practically on the kinds of computations that you can structure to be embedded on the Chia blockchain. But also the coin set model definitely sets the default for ownership to the right place. Like simply having the madhouse that grew out of the ICO boom in Ethereum was clearly not healthy. There are many practical reasons for CoinSet being a better model for that, and I think the synthesis of them is very valuable. I think that's whatever else gets taken away, that's probably the durable thing about Chia.
When you think about Chialisp programming, how much of the existing body of work is foremost in your mind? I would think about things like singleton, cat, tail, other things like maybe inner puzzle hash, that idea hinting. How much of this stuff is in your day to day? Do you think about these things when you start working on something like Chia Game or even finishing this stuff up? Do you try to preserve any of the lore and the architecture that's been built so far?
I mean, yes, all of that stuff and things very like them, are the things that are on my mind generally when I'm working on compilation. The one of the big things that will come out of module style when it's landed is a thing that's been a pain in the ass for a long time, and that is capturing the sharing code between puzzles and capturing the hash of one puzzle from another and having them be sort of chainable in that way. So that was one of the things Bram was especially unhappy about, and that we came up with a decent way of tackling. this won't be released for a while. It has to work through Chia's internal process and such. But the good thing that will pop out of it is that you'll be able to write Chialisp programs, and those programs will be importable from other programs. You'll be able to mention functions by name. You'll be able to, let's say, have a farm of functions that that are interrelated, and then be able to mention them by name and even treat them as separate programs for the purpose of computing hashes of things. So it'll become a lot more fluid to write a state machine in Chialisp, whereas now you write separate entry points that act as separate programs and have included files in between them. It'll be possible to write a set of exports from a single program that all output essentially separate steps of the coin's state machine, and all of them can be aware of the other's mod hashes, just from internal computation. So that's a thing that's beneficial.
So I know hinting was something in the coin world and announcing, inner puzzle hashes and stuff like this as one of the ways that wallets had been finding coins that were appropriately associated with a keychain. How much of that do you feel we went down the right path, or have you been thinking maybe there's better ways to do some of this stuff, like just even finding out about something that might be associated with something that your mnemonic might have ownership of in some sense?
That's a thing I don't actually know that much about. I know Matt Hoff and and others have thought a lot more about that than I have.
Well, it's something that I hit as a wallet developer, somebody who was making an interface into it. And so it still is something that I tend to think about and ask questions whenever I get in front of the right people. So no worries if that's not really something you work on. And you're saying it's pretty much Matt Hoff and Matt Howard that are the ones that are still championing in that? Okay.
Yeah, they're kind of the architects of everything about the wallet, along with, to a lesser extent, Richard Kess.
Is Richard still pretty active inside of
Yes.
CNI? I haven't. What's he working on these days?
Yeah, he's working on something actually kind of amazing. He's written I think most of an implementation of CLVM and Lean 4. And he's working on being able to do proof carrying through each of the CLVM operations so that you can write Lean 4 style proofs about CLVM output, which is really neat and is definitely needed. A thing that I've kind of worked on and off of.
And this is to move towards formal proofs of correctness. Is that what that's about?
Yes, to be able to state formal proofs about the output of CLVM programs.
And is that the kind of thing that Chia is going to start self-publishing those types of things, of the reference puzzles that are put out by CNI, or is that something that's anticipated that you would see done by sophisticated members of the community like Sebastian, maybe?
So I imagine that probably given the way, given that it's been very successful up till now, probably that proof work will be done in a longer term, strategically, sort of when puzzles are already out in the wild, at least for the moment, because it's, as you might know, stating proofs about things is hard, and actually came across some writing that was kind of amazing. I'll share the URL with you, and maybe that's but the critical insight that this person came up with is that sort of reversing algorithms and stating proofs about programs is hard to the extent that the program forgets things. And the whole purpose of hash algorithms is to forget things. So, that's one reason that it's very hard to sit down with a proof and say, this only responds to my key, and it's almost entirely impossible for that to be provable for a thing that does crypto or hashing, simply because saying the only thing that's isomorphic to this key is this one, let's say, public key or signature, is basically impossible. You just don't have enough bits normally. And so, it often takes a lot of theoretical reflection to work through a program that uses crypto from the perspective of a proof system to say something relatively strong about it. So I think for that reason, it's probably the case that you'll see, sort of in order of importance and complexity, Chia's existing puzzles first getting formal proofs put out about them, and then later ones will catch up sooner and sooner, but probably almost certainly not concurrent.
This is one thing that I've seen as a pretty stark distinction between Chia and the broader crypto ecosystem, is this focus on math, on proofs, on correctness, on security. It seems like it's a big differentiator. And I know you said you don't really keep up in the broader community, but it is something that really sticks out to me when I point people and first start having them look at Chialisp. I say, take a look at this CAT standard. CAT 2 has this big preamble where essentially it's all this math around how this stuff works. And I say, I challenge you to go look at a lot of other smart contracts that are written, and it just doesn't seem like that level of formalism and that level of rigor comes in a lot of other chains. And it sounds like this is just part and parcel with the way that Chia is operating internally. Does that seem accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's a strong cultural sympathy for it, and that's really good. Like Bram would let someone run for, a year and a half or 2 years if they're making progress on stuff like this. And that's probably pretty unique. Chia itself obviously is working toward being, a long-term viable and long-term profitable business as well. So there are other pressures internally. Like we don't all sit around doing math all day in that way. But I think when someone comes up with something strong and striking, they wind up being able to take a lot of time on it, and that's really good.
It's one of the critical things to really advancing things, is to not necessarily have to try to do it with a gun pointed at your head. I know in various points in my development career, I've had that strong sense of impending pressure. And sometimes you look back at, God, I wished I could have done this better, because now we're well into this thing being launched into production, and those things which we didn't get to spend the right amount of time on are now coming back to haunt us.
Yeah, and a lot of that, like, for complex reasons, a lot of what I've done on Chialisp as well has been a little bit rushed, but mainly due to my own perceptions about it. And that's a thing that I'm working to change, you might say. So it's like, it's not, you get in the habit of feeling like everything is going to be demanded and feeling like you're constantly justifying yourself. I've gone through burnout a few times in my career. And you kind of come down from that, and it's a mindset that you may still be carrying with you, even if the organization isn't really pushing it at the moment. It's easy to get back into that sort of time pressure mindset, unfortunately.
Lucas, we're pretty much at time. Did you have any last questions you wanted to present to Art? And I guess, Art, any last comments of anything that where the conversation has gone that you're hoping that we could come back to, or that we could close it off with?
Yeah, not really. You guys asked pretty good questions, and it's been nice to do this podcast with you.
Well, Art, thank you for coming on. I thank you for entertaining our questions and telling us about what's going on with the CLVM, and I really enjoyed it. Come back sometime if it wasn't onerous, and enjoyed it.
Yeah, so did I. Thanks.
Yeah, I think certainly, we would be super excited if you hit the milestone in Chia gaming and you say this thing's pretty well cooked and I'm moving on to the next project. That might be a good point to retrospect it, but it sounds like you're still deep in the middle of it and more looking forward to it, and know that there's a lot of us out in the community that are kind of keeping an eye on this repo because we're very curious to see this come across the line.
Yeah. The next thing that I'm like sort of concurrent with module style, like I've owed everyone much better debugging for a long time, and I've got some work in progress on that I'm hoping to spill next year. I think that'll really be great for everyone.
We're looking forward to 2025 being the year of Chia. It sounds like there's a lot of strong tailwinds pushing the chain and a lot of this development effort forward. So we'll definitely look forward to that Q1 that you pointed out, as January is when things really should be looking good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll hope to have you back on the show at some point in the future.
All right. Thanks.